Well, thanks everyone for being here. My name is Dean Ball. I'm a senior fellow at the Foundation for American Innovation. And I'm very pleased to be joined by three people that I'm happy to call friends and colleagues, whom I will introduce now. To my immediate left is Sam Hammond. He's chief economist at FAI and writer of the Substack Second Best. By the way, I'm just going to make up all your bios. I'm not going to read everything. And Sam does some of the most imaginative writing on institutional transformation in light of AI, which I think will be very useful for this session, which is about AI in government and AGI-enabled government and things of that sort. Seb, what's your title? What's your actual title?
Frontier Policy Development Lead.
Yeah, Seb is the communications director of Google DeepMind, tweeter-in-chief of Google DeepMind, and
Definitely not that.
I think one of the people with the most sensible takes. AGI-pilled yet sensible is how I would describe Seb, the sort of secret third thing of AI policy. And then to the furthest left is Tim Fist, who is a senior fellow, right? Senior fellow at director, okay, at the Institute for Progress, which is sort of a kindred spirit organization to the Foundation for American Innovation, where Sam and I both are. Tim writes about all kinds of stuff. He writes about compute governance, energy. You've written about NIST before, many different things sort of relating to AI governance in the future. And so I think where I want to start this conversation is on the adoption of AI in government today. What does that actually look like? And I recently did a stint in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where in addition to leading the drafting, I should say, of the Trump administration's AI action plan, I also, which had a bunch of stuff about government adoption, I was also the co-chair of a government services administration body called the AI Community of Practice, which is like basically an intergovernmental body for talking about sort of best practices, lessons learned in AI adoption. So I kind of got to, there were thousands of people who were a part of this body. And I kind of got to learn a lot of interesting things in doing that. What would I say right now about AI adoption in government? It's probably not as bad as some people in here might think, but it's also definitely not even, double-digit percentage of the way where we need to be. Some of the most exciting AI adoption that I saw in government is really happening inside of the national security apparatus. There's a lot of, very technically talented people, and there's a lot of use cases that they have. And, Anthropic, I think, has really led the way on this, and that's credit to them. We've done the hard work. One of the really hard things is just getting these systems into, classified and other kinds of secure computing environments. Very non-trivial. You can't just do, if you're CIA, you can't just do an API call to OpenAI. That doesn't work. And so that infrastructure is kind of there, and that's a very good thing. And in that sense, government is not that far behind the frontier, but there are other things that are serious obstacles, right? So the White House, the executive office of the president, is the bureaucracy that surrounds the president. You can't use LLMs in the White House. None. It's actually not entirely true. The Office of Management Budget has a closet where there is one server where you can access Gemma 8B from a year ago. You can do that. It is a thing. That is the LLM that and you actually have to be logged into a special OMB system. It's very complicated. Anyway, the reason that you can't has to do with a complex of laws, but the most important one is called the Presidential Records Act, transparency bill passed post-Watergate. That makes it basically very, very difficult from a compliance perspective for the federal government for the executive office of the president to use AI, or at least LLMs. But then beyond that, I think what we're seeing is agencies using it for mundane things, right? Drafting emails, reviewing, summarizing documents, things of this sort. I wouldn't call any of the adoption that I've seen transformative adoption. And I think that one of the things I would like to probe in this conversation is what exactly is it? The action plan talks about transformative adoption of AI. That was is a little bit Chinese. It's a little bit new productive forces, if you are familiar with CCP lingo. We talk about transformative adoption, and it means something specific that isn't just adoption, but what exactly it means, I can't entirely tell you. And so I'd like to probe a little bit what it actually does mean. So so to that end, I think first of all, what are you all seeing, and what is kind of exciting to you in terms of like just current day, present day, mundane government, not mundane, but government adoption of AI, and where do you think we should go? Tim, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so we're developing a really big-brained proposal at the moment with Michael Boyce, who head the Department of Homeland Security AI Corps in the previous administration. So they brought in like 50 ML engineers to upgrade like the DHS's systems for immigration and such. And the big brain pitch is just like, let's just give people access to ChatGPT in federal governments and other tools, of course. But yeah, there's this like, I think like sense that people have in like some federal agencies that we need to procure some like really fancy system. Like for example, for like environmental permitting, we need to like fine tune some model and sort of like build some custom tool and then adapt that. But like actually, we have like these commercial tools, these like SaaS apps that are just like amazing general purpose reasoners, like the combination of like long context length, general purpose reasoning, like coding skills is like this incredible combination of things that is just like a massive increase in productivity. You can get people access to that. Some federal agencies are like doing well on this. So like the CDC, I think, adopted ChatGPT in 2023. They claim that it's saved them 41,000 hours and like was a 500% return on investment. But like the norm across like most federal agencies is like they're not using this stuff. And I think one of the biggest barriers that like we've observed is that this sort of procurement team who's like worried about security sees there being sort of like these like novel security risks with AI models. And I think this comes from seeing them as something categorically different to just like a normal SaaS app that you're sending your data to, which I think is wrong. And there's like existing procurement processes that the US government has for solving these problems. Sort of the main one in civilian agencies is FedRAMP. And it turns out that, basically every modern LLM and most like AI coding tools are actually FedRAMP approved. And all we need is kind of like a mandate that we make that clear. And I think the action plan actually talked about this. We need like a universal LLM mandate across federal government. And I think like the way to implement that is like every, chief information officer across every agency should declare that, yes, everyone within this agency like can access like these tools and here's how you do it, or they have to sort of like provide like a specific reason why this is like no longer the case, and like hopefully this just leads to mass adoption. So yeah, that's the basic proposal, and I think like could solve like a lot of the problems here.
Yeah, I agree with you that federal government Gemini more. I think the one thing I'll also say is that there are definitely like issues on the kind of procurement side sometimes. I used to work in the UK government about 5 years ago. And we did a big report trying to look at, why is, that was pre-LLM, like where is AI being adopted, where is it not being adopted at the time, just general kind of data science tools. And there are loads of issues within government sometimes in terms of siloed data sets, a culture of, risk aversion, not really wanting to kind of experiment with these things. And then the procurement process itself is sometimes very complicated, costly, onerous, meaning that many startups out there, kind of struggle to even get on the systems to start with. And when they do, getting paid on time is the other thing. Another thing I'll just add is that I agree that these kind of general purpose tools like the chatbots, ChatGPT, Gemini, and so on would be an amazing step forward. I do think there are many applications also that are a little bit more, narrow in some sense, that don't just work with these kind of systems out of the box. One example is recently in the UK government, I think they had a team, I think, that does kind of a lot of AI tooling and infrastructure kind of procurement, that kind of thing. And they we've worked with kind of Google DeepMind on a thing called Extract. And so as you may know, the procurement process is complicated, to put it mildly, and relies on kind of making sense of loads and loads of data, maps, old documents. Like in the UK, these can be kind of contracts or like handwritten notes from like, decades and decades ago. And it takes a lot of time for like planning officers to actually go through these. Like it'll take maybe like 2 hours for a single application. And you get thousands of applications a month. And so they ended up building a system, using Gemini, given its kind of native multimodal abilities, that actually kind of isn't just an out-of-the-box type kind of chatbot-like system, but actually makes sense of all of this data, extracts all the kind of relevant polygons, the maps, the text, the wording, and everything to create the right kind of structured data and accelerate the creation of essentially the planning process quite massively. So something that would otherwise take 2 hours now takes kind of about less than 3 minutes, and costs like something like 10p or 10 cents. And so I think that at scale, there's loads of these kinds of applications across the board that I think can really kind of accelerate many processes that currently take quite a lot of time with government.
I guess I'll start by saying like why I think this is an important topic. Like if you look at every major general purpose technology and technological transition has tended to precede equally transformative changes in our system of government and our institutions. And the reason for that is sort of manifold. One is it affects like the key transaction costs that influence the shape and structure of organizations. Séb has written an excellent recent piece on this sort of about Gaussian bargaining with AI. Secondarily, it also like can even small technical changes can lead to like new coordinating mechanisms, new coordinating equilibria in ways that can, even on the margin, lead to dramatic shifts in what's optimal. So, there's a famous stirrup thesis that the invention of the stirrup is what led to feudalism, because suddenly you could have horseback knights, and it's like very minor technical change. But you can also look at in the modern era where, Uber and Lyft, by economizing on the falling transaction costs from mobile and the internet and the search and matching algorithms that they were able to use, led to a kind of regime change vis-a-vis traditional taxi commissions, which were like quasi-government agencies. And you can imagine a world where like the taxi commissions, hired a bunch of engineers and like built the app themselves ahead of time. And that I guess in theory is possible, but is not like likely because of sort of the innovator's dilemma. And this gets to why this is an important issue, because our government is like the ultimate innovator's dilemma. And I worry and stay up at night in part thinking is our government the taxi commission that's about to get disrupted. And so I break this into sort of the short run and the long run. And by long run, I mean like 5 years. But but like in the short run, I think there's like very obvious ways where AI could already be speeding up government from issues like permitting. I think about the Federal Trade Commission has a 28 attorney team for the entire healthcare sector, right? And these are people that could be making double or triple in the private sector who have sort of done an act of public service and are manually reviewing 40,000 emails from some pharma CEO looking for misconduct. When like today they could put it into Gemini and other long context models and say, find me the most egregious examples of misconduct. And so there's like on the low end, I think there's like some optimism that even because these tools are so general purpose, like even just getting these LLMs sort of approved means that like one day the BLS economist will wake up to do the morning, the monthly job situation report, and will be very tempted to just press the button that does it for him or her. And that would lead to sort of automatic adoption. But then I worry about in the longer run that it's not sort of enough. If we have an explosion of drug discovery to give FDA officials a co-pilot, we're going to need like fundamental process innovation. And at that point, the ultimate bottleneck is Congress, because you can give civil servants AI, but like a lot of the structure of government is in statute. And so then looking at the longer run, I think as we talk, we're going to get progressively more futurist. But like, if y'all were here for like the Emmett Shear talk, we are kind of overfitting 20th century institutions to a 21st century economy and tech stack. And how do we bring back a kind of adaptability to government? And this is where I think like more radical reforms are potentially worth considering. The analogy I sometimes make is like the 20th century regulatory state was like the good old fashioned AI for rulemaking, where it's the algebraic way of doing rules where we formalize it all into like legible, verifiable proof theorems and things along those lines. When I think in the long run, if we're going to make it through this transition, we're going to need to sort of grow our government, not in size, but in terms of setting some hyperparameters and reward functions and letting the AI do the rest.
So I think, I guess I'll say this, like when I think about like transformative adoption of AI in government, I don't really think about, like, yes, I think you should give every employee a chatbot. I think that's important and probably will be the seed of many valuable things. But like, I'll give you two examples that show the good version of this and also what scares me about what I call the use of AI in government. So the good version of this is there's an authority that the Commerce Department has called ICTS authorities. And the way to think about what this authority does is that anything that's made, a component of a thing or a finished good, which connects to the internet and is made in China, can be banned by the federal government using this authority, which is useful because very often there are things like, for example, in that camera right there or in the speaker or whatever, they're like maybe that speaker is made in Japan or maybe it's made here in the United States for all I know, or maybe it's made in China. But there might be a subcomponent of that system, like a chip in it, some 90 nanometer, legacy chip that we're worried about, right? Because maybe that chip might also be in like an inverter or a transformer or something, and it could be hacked and it could be used to derail the grid. I note that a data center in South Korea caught fire for several days last week, and I think there's very strong evidence that it was because of a battery malfunction of a battery made in China, and it seemed like there's some sort of cyber attack, some sort of deliberate cyber attack that occurred. These kinds of things happen. Factories randomly blow up, and it's like, why did that happen? No one knows why. So this is a real thing. I think it will become an increasingly real thing. And so ICTS, the problem is like tariffs don't really help you with that, because it's like tariffs can't get at that random chip, right? You can do the finished good, but you can't get at that random chip. So even if the stuff is manufactured in the United States, if there's some random subcomponent that costs 2 cents, it's very difficult to deal with this on tariffs. ICTS authorities are a way of dealing with this. The problem is that I once had a meeting at the White House where I was asked, like, what do you think we should do ICTS authorities to? And I was like, I don't know. There's 75,000 things I can think of, but like each investigation takes a year, right? Each investigation takes 1 year at least. And so the Commerce Department has capacity to do like 3 of these. And so if you could automate that function, if you could like truly end-to-end automate this function, it would qualitatively change the nature of like what this tool that the government already has can be used for, and what I think would actually be like a quite good way, both in terms of national security and also industrial policy. So that is like a good example of it. A bad example of this is like, so there's something that happens when you are given a top secret clearance in the federal government, and you have to sign a contract that says that the federal government has the right to sort of pre-review everything that you write in public after you leave government for like, does it contain classified information or analysis? Right now, that is not an abused feature. It's a very powerful lever that the government has over everybody who's ever served in high-level positions in the government that, you know, you could imagine, right, being abused very heavily. It's not abused right now. One could imagine transformative adoption of large language models that enables, you know, quite rampant abuses of this, and like making it such that, like, you know, the federal government can kind of stop a lot of post-government employees from speaking publicly, which would be like quite damaging, right? So I guess, you know, should we be scared about transformative adoption of AI in government, or should we be accelerationist about it?
I think a bit of both, you know. It depends. But I agree with this kind of latter point.
Sensible secret third thing
Always,
takes
all of the above. But yeah, I think, you know, the example you give is a good one, because essentially what I think AI can do is reduce friction, increase efficiency, and also reduce principal agent problems. And so in a way, it helps you kind of do the thing you're trying to do just much more effectively. And that can sometimes be bad, because we rely a lot on kind of discretion sometimes, we rely a lot on inefficiencies, we rely on friction. And I think if you remove a lot of these kind of things in between, you can sometimes get to places that are undesirable because of the, you know, the actual kind of rules or the systems around them aren't kind of fit for purpose. So I guess if you were to imagine automated enforcement of, you know, jaywalking laws or something, you know, that'd be somewhat annoying to be fined every time I kind of like. And so I think this kind of is a bit of a forcing function to then think through, you know, are the rules, are the laws, are the regulations, everything kind of appropriate and fit for purpose in a world where things are kind of, you know, you can just do things in some sense.
I bet you that right now we are violating some sort of law for which the owners of Lighthaven could be sued enormously. And you can, like, maybe there's too many people in this room and it's kind of hot in here. Maybe it's too hot in here. Maybe in the future you can imagine that the California government has satellites that are orbiting all over and can detect the sonic signatures of every building and immediately fine the owners of Lighthaven for such things with agentic commerce. Maybe they'll use the agentic commerce protocol from OpenAI to fine you. Right? That sounds pretty shitty to me.
Yeah, I've talked about this in terms of seeing like an AI state. You know, there's, I think, a rule that you can't have a panel without mentioning James C. Scott again. You know, when Tesla rolled out their first FSD self-driving technology, it was doing rolling stops because it was trained end-to-end on human data. And obviously, you know, rolling stops are at 2 a.m. when there's no one at the intersection are perfectly fine, and you won't get a ticket for that because the law, including jaywalking, a lot of laws are written with the expectation of imperfect enforcement. But now you had this ability to, you know, issue a recall, which the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration immediately did, to all Teslas on the road because of their capacity to stop. And so we're going to have, and just like we have a jagged frontier of intelligence, this like jagged frontier of perfect compliance, that potentially like existing laws with much greater enforcement become totalitarian because they were written with the expectation of imperfect enforcement.
Yeah, so I think another area where the sign of government adoption of AI seems a little bit unclear. So we talked a bit about enforcement. The other area that we've chatted a little about is like epistemics. So like, what is the sign of the impact of AI on the government epistemics about policy decision making? I'm interested, maybe like a question for you, Dean, especially around forecasting, as this seems kind of like a frontier application at the moment that we might see a lot more of. I guess for context, I think GPT-4o was like an absolutely trash forecaster. It was like, bottom 10% of humans. O3 was like top 50%. And now we have sort of like agentic scaffolds that get to sort of top 20% of human forecasters. So I think like Metaculus just finished, like forecasting platform, just finished their quarterly cup. An AI model by the company Mantic, I think, came 8th. So it was like in the top like 20% of human scores, which is like pretty good. And you can imagine that these kind of forecasting capabilities being pretty useful for policy decision making. If you had access to a forecasting AI tool when writing the action plan and sort of forecasting the impacts of different policy decisions, how useful would this be for you? I'm interested in how you think about like, will these things get adopted in government? How can they be useful for policy stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think very useful, but so this gets me to like one of the organizations of government that I thought a lot about when I was working on the action plan was the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, which does the inflation data and whatnot. So I was interested in them as a method for tracking AI labor issues. Over time, as I was thinking about it more and more, I was like, well, like what does Silicon Valley do? Silicon Valley has gotten very good at extracting signal about like what's going on in the world in some sense from like weird things, right? So like how much time you spent lingering on a particular image or hovering over a particular link or whatever can be used to communicate or to infer lots and lots of stuff about your intent and your desire. And we've only gotten better at that, and I suspect we'll get more, better and better at it. It seems to me that like I look at something like the Bureau of Labor Statistics and like them going around and asking people questions, and like they have field agents who are going out and like, and it all seems a little quaint to me in some sense. And it seems like, yeah, like you could ultimately create like, you could create a simulation of the economy and just like test all kinds of stuff out in it, right? Like, why wouldn't you just do that? But then we get into the taxi commission question of like, do I really think that the government is going to be the place that happens? And like, that sounds pretty compute intensive to me. And yeah, we're going to need a bigger closet in the NEOB, the new executive office building. I apologize. It's next to the White House. So the Department of Energy right now generates so much data. They generate so much scientific data that they have to discard petabytes of data like every week because they don't have data for storage. And when I tell that story to people in Silicon Valley, like they don't have data for storage, like not compute. We're talking about storage. They don't have the money for that. Like I don't know, man. Like I feel skeptical, and so maybe now we can get into. I want to start actually with your great essay, which I recommend to everybody in this room about transactions costs. Séb, your essay about transaction costs is about it's about reducing friction, right? It's about reducing frictions that come from transaction costs, and many technologies are transaction cost lowering. I think like AGI can be modeled as something that pushes transaction costs asymptotically to zero. And if that happens, like government exists in many ways to resolve like high transactions cost for certain kinds of things. And like, if the transaction costs just all go asymptotically to zero, like what is the point? What are the taxes for other than paying debt?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think government's really useful for that function, but it's not the only thing.
Paying debt.
Yeah,
it is good at that. Yeah,
it's very good, but it's not the only, I think, function. And I think I guess what I argue in the piece is that there are many problems we have, many kind of coordination failures that stem as a result of the inability to make a deal, to essentially come to find a way to find some sort of in-between solution. But the transaction costs are too high for that. Like people aren't, I'm not going to go and negotiate with every single person in my neighborhood. And similarly, there's a lot of things that, we can't just do. And therefore we've got some sort of big blunt law regulation or something that kind of finds some sort of average that, sometimes works and sometimes makes no one happy. And the idea is that, with these agents, you can start doing kind of coordination that would otherwise not be possible. And my hope is that, through that, you can get a lot of more like positive sum type kind of dynamics and escape like, local minima and zero sum type thinking. Now, in the example you're giving here, like I think government's role is not just to kind of resolve transaction costs. It's also, enforcing contracts and enforcing the law and many other things. And so I think by reducing these transaction costs in many of these areas, you're also allowing government to kind of spend their resources and their efforts on all the other things that matter and they're well placed to do. So I guess my piece is not arguing that, once you have these agents, you can get away with government entirely. Like no more, you don't need for government. I still think you need the kind of top-down infrastructure, and you also need a lot of the kind of, democratic governance infrastructure to, vote for people, vote for laws, this, essentially get kind of a sense of what people want and resolving disputes and so on. And so, all the functions of government, whether it's, the executive, legislative, or, the courts and so on, are still needed. What I think happens is that they can do their role a lot more effectively.
It's kind of the regulatory state, though, that is sort of disintermediated in some ways, it seems to me. Sorry, I just wanted to quickly,
I guess two points. I mean, like, should we be going into this brave new world and just like full steam ahead? I think in some level there are like extreme risks, but we also don't really have a choice because adoption is going to be, much faster in the private sector, and to the extent that there's like this arms race between the public and private sector, the public sector will need to keep up. But then when it comes to these different levels of government, practically speaking, the kinds of systems you interact with the government on a day-to-day basis are state and local. And I think there's more opportunity because of more, the laboratories of democracy, ability to experiment for state governments to take a lead on this. So I'm on the Governor Youngkin's Virginia AI task force. They're piloting the use of AI agents to do reg review. I think that's a very obvious thing that more states should be pursuing. But over the longer run, things like law enforcement, things like property and title, like these core government functions are all going to be implicated by AI. And states have an opportunity to be much more early adopters because of their, among other things, just being much less polarized.
And just a very quick point also is that I do think, amongst kind of the risk we're talking about, there's also something around, insufficient adoption leading to kind of weird asymmetric kind of relationships. So what one risk I'm thinking about is, as you mentioned, there's government should be adopting this stuff because otherwise, here's an example, a person might be, in 5 years or something, able to use an agent to launch loads of cases, like litigate and so on. And these are, reasonable, nothing wrong there. But if you're the judiciary and you're getting, thousands of cases a month now, there's already huge backlogs. It's already really hard. And so if you don't kind of actually start also using and integrating these systems within government, you end up with these kind of like even, more problematic state capacity and kind of government breaking down. So I think this is another element that I think we should bear in mind is when you've got certain parts using AI a lot and getting a lot of efficiency gains and others not doing it, what happens then? And things I think can crack at that point. So hot take.
Yeah, maybe I'm interested in exploring the ideas that you've introduced in your great blog post again on Cozy and bargaining and transaction costs. Yeah, it seems to me the vision is, replace the role of a centralized regulator with, personalized AI agents that have an extremely good model of your own preferences that can engage in person-to-person negotiations. I'm wondering where you see the near-term opportunities for like regulations to be replaced with this kind of system. Like what do you kind of expect to happen first? Like where are the transaction costs highest, or where can they most be reduced? And then, how does that happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. If I had a great idea here, I'd be probably doing my own startup.
Talk about pollution.
Yeah, I think pollution is one of them. I mean, I think, I start like a really, really micro level. Like I think the very most kind of basic thing for me, it's not even like state or government related. It's like calendar management. Like, I've got a bunch of friends. I want to organize a party. Don't know who's free when, whatever. Like, you can use this kind of system to now like very quickly know, okay, here's when we can do it. Here's like a place that caters to everyone's preferences, and I think then you can start going bigger and bigger, right? Like at a kind of neighborhood level or something. One example is, someone trying to build a factory or a house or an airport kind of extension or something. Usually what happens is that you have kind of, a bunch of very upset NIMBYs who kind of, just complain about that and usually kind of stop these developments. Whereas I think with the same system, the one I'm proposing, all the interests of the people who gain to benefit from this kind of extra billing can also be, part of the negotiation. So rather than, being held hostage by, a very small group that kind of are just very loud, you've got a lot more people now saying, well, actually, we do want the kind of airport extension here because clearly that's, beneficial to us or something. I mean, in practice now, I don't know if that's going to be the very first way to do it. But, there's a bunch of other things I was thinking about. I like throwing parties sometimes. And so there's noise laws or something, it's like no more noise after 11 p.m. It's like, well, maybe I can negotiate with my neighborhood, for like, this one night, I'll compensate them for the noise or something. So, these are like just small examples here and there, but I think it's basically a framework or a way of them, like where are there coordination problems that we could kind of just, remove the kind of central point or the top-down kind of imposition of a very blunt rule and kind of get more of a organic bottom-up approach to governance. And I think that goes to like, Sam's point earlier of, at scale, this is what I would think leads to governments that are more liquid, more kind of adaptive over time, rather than just relying on, one more rule, just one more rule, bro. I swear I lost one. And it's just on and.
I can throw out a handful of examples. So, like, there's that famous judge who, on an obscenity case, who said, what is pornography? I know it when I see it, right? And the problem with that definition is you can't write it into a rule, but you can train a binary classifier. Right. And, the way we do like all kinds of regulation these days is of the former type where in ways it's almost comical. Right. So like if you want to build a new airplane, safety is certified part by part. Right. And so, there's I used to do stuff on supersonic and the Boom Aerospace was looking at like, could we use these new advanced adhesives to glue together the fuselage? But no, the bolts and nuts are the things that are part certified. So we have to use that. Right. And so, there's a version of this which is like performance-based or outcome-based regulation, but you can imagine a much more like ML version of this where it's like, does the AI model, does it pass the AI model's test of safe airworthiness? And you just throw everything in the kitchen sink. That's one thing. I think then, when it comes to sort of monitoring enforcement, you see some of this already where like, for pollution controls, smokestacks will have like monitors in them that are continuously detecting the kinds of pollutants that are coming out, rather than having someone go in and actually like measure it manually. We do versions of the manual thing for all kinds of stuff. So farm inspectors from the FDA every 2 years will go to the chicken farm and everyone will be on their best behavior, and like the guy who kicks the chickens will be off that day. But you can imagine, having just like multimodal cameras that are running all the time that have various, privacy and civil liberties protections baked in. They have one job, which is use their multimodal intelligence to make sure the chickens are happy. And then you can, radically not just shrink the sort of human resources footprint of government, but also do different kinds of governance, not sort of this rule-based version. And then lastly, like, one of my worries with like the differential arms race between the government and the private sector is that there's going to be a kind of like distributed denial of service attack on our institutions, right? If we all have AGIs in our pocket, like a lot of our institutions are just going to get overwhelmed. And I think a vision of that future happened during COVID when there was a sudden and discontinuous increase in people who are eligible for unemployment insurance, who are then lining up around the block. Often, they had online systems that nominally you could apply for, but for whatever reason had 9 to 5 business hours. And the reason that system was so broken is because all these mainframes were built in the Kennedy administration and run on COBOL and Fortran. And most of the COBOL, there was like 100 living COBOL programmers that they had to pull out of retirement. But there's 50 states with all their own system. To the extent that AI and transformer models are a kind of universal codex, universal translator for different languages, it's suddenly going to become possible for relatively resource-constrained state governments to say, we can't hire all the COBOL programmers, but we can get some Python, high schoolers to, basically translate all our old technical debt into a modern language that we can actually work with.
I will make a closing point here, which is just about, like, Sam, to some extent, what you are describing is a world in which we sort of dive into the black box. We like accept that like the world is not comprehensible according to like nature's made of curves, not 90-degree angles is the way I put this, right? It doesn't work according to rules that we can write down on a piece of paper. And if it did, we would have solved AGI like 1,000 years ago.
Sorry, Gary Marcus.
Sorry, Gary Marcus. If you're here, Gary, it's like this problem of like dimensionality, and like you're supposed to. It's like, how do you like sort of navigate, right? You have to just ultimately accept, like, you have to dive into the unknown and accept that like we actually can't write it all down in a way that's like human interpretable and satisfying, and that includes the neural networks themselves, right? We'll be able to do some interpretability, but we'll never perfectly understand the neural networks because they themselves are like the world, and they're made of curves, not 90-degree angles. So they'll never submit to our blocky abstractions. I think that's like a cultural change that you have to somehow make happen, and I don't know how. It is why I called my Substack hyperdimensional. Is referencing this concept of like navigating high dimensional spaces, and we have to accept that that's not something that's going to submit to our normal human intuitions, but our industrial era intuitions. But in some ways, like, I think humans were way more open to the concept of mystery before we figured out what stars were made of. In any event, like, I think that's like the question I'm left with is, will we be able to actually affect that cultural change? Thanks, everybody.